Happy Halloween, everybody. Today we're back with 10 spooky medical facts. I know that's a little cliche. I was researching these just to double check my numbers, and I was actually somewhat terrified. So it should be good. Spooky medical fact number 1. The third leading cause of death in Americans, something that kills 10% of Americans a year, of those who die, is called iatrogenic. Iatrogenic is a very fancy way of saying doctor caused. So physician intervention is responsible for 10% of the deaths a year in the US. That is a huge deal. Now, there's probably some variation in that and gray zone and those sort of things, but the reality is that medical intervention is not insignificant. It is not just purely a safe thing and, oh, that's great, let's do it. Please be skeptical of your physicians. Please ask them thorough questions. Please keep them on their toes, because if 10% of Americans who are dying each year is due to a doctor error, that's a really, really spooky fact. This is really hard, I think, for physicians to deal with because they're in a system that makes them see a bunch of people and treat them all as a statistic rather than listening to them individually. And one of the things that I'm really happy about is I have a medical practice that lets me sit down with every single one of my patients for an hour and get to know them very much in depth. That's how we improve that statistic, by thinking about people as individuals rather than statistics and saying, oh, let's just do the thing. Ooh, that didn't work. Spooky medical fact number 2. 60% of Americans have a chronic disease. 60%, over half of Americans have a chronic disease. That's amazing in the worst way. Why do we have so much chronic disease? We have so much chronic disease because the modern mainstream medical system doesn't know how to treat and get rid of chronic disease. It just covers it up with pills. That's the reality of it. Mainstream medicine is great at acute issues. I get hit by a car, thank God there are well-trained surgeons out there. I have diabetes, how do we do anything about that? Well, here's a medicine that's going to control your blood sugar, but we don't know how to fix the underlying cause. That's ridiculous. There's lots of good science on how we correct those things. It's just not part of mainstream medicine. And as a result, because that's obviously the predominant culture, 60% of Americans are stuck with a chronic disease, many of which we probably could turn the other direction. It's not always true for everybody. I get it. I'm not saying that, functional integrated medicine is a panacea that's just going to, magically resolve things, but we should certainly be pushing ourselves to do better. And that's largely a philosophical problem. We have to think about resolving illness, not just managing it into perpetuity with pharmaceuticals. That's not going to solve any problems. And if someone has diabetes one year and they're managing it, not fixing it, not resolving it, managing it, guess what? In pretty short order, they have cholesterol issues or heart disease issues or a whole host of other things because this wasn't perfectly managed. So we really have to get back to the root of things if we're going to scrub out this spooky medical fact. Spooky medical fact number 3. 98% of Americans are suboptimal in a micronutrient. 98% of Americans are suboptimal in a micronutrient. See, I'm so excited I said suboptimal. It's a big deal. These micronutrients are necessary to run dozens, if not hundreds of processes per micronutrient. And if we don't have enough of it to do this successfully, guess what? We have error. Error accumulates into illness. 98% of Americans. That's really super spooky. People debate about why that's happening, and probably the answer to this is, of course, complicated, but probably it has a lot to do with the fact that our agricultural system is a hot mess. If we are analogous to mining, strip mining our fields, we grow a field of cabbage and we replace certain specific nutrients and we ignore all the other things that are in the soil. Guess what? Over the course of years to decades, that soil doesn't have, let's say, the magnesium that it used to. And then that cabbage doesn't have the magnesium that it was supposed to. And then we don't have the magnesium that we were supposed to. Now, this also discounts the fact that a lot of our guts and our absorption is also heavily challenged. The reality is that if we're deficient in a micronutrient or suboptimal in a micronutrient, our health is dramatically improved by identifying that specific, unique to us, and correcting that. I'm a minimalist. I don't want everyone to feel like they have to just take a bunch of supplements. But if you are suboptimal in magnesium and you're not getting it from your diet, absolutely you should take a supplement. So get with a doc who can correct that so you're part of the 2%. Spooky medical fact number 4. 66% of Americans take a prescription. 25% of Americans take at least 3 prescriptions. Yikes. That's a lot. And there are a lot of drugs that are over the counter as well that aren't included in that. The trouble with this, the reason that it scares me, is that when we're taking a prescription long term, it means we're not resolving the problem. Right? Go back to spooky medical fact number 2, where we have all this chronic illness that's stuck. These prescriptions are not simple things, guys. They're changing your biology fundamentally, and your biology then has to have a new balance. It has to work with this. I'm not saying prescriptions are bad. I'm saying I wish we didn't have to use them. I wish 66% of Americans didn't have to use them every single day. That, to me, is spooky. Spooky medical fact number 5. 20% of Americans take an acid blocker. This is particularly worrisome because if we're taking an acid blocker routinely, 1, it means we have an unresolved problem that we're covering up. 2, these strong acid blockers, like proton pump inhibitors, have enormous ramifications. If you look at the side effect profile of these, it's significant. And this isn't a sort of, oh, cover our butts, put everything under the sun under the side effect profile. No, these have really significant side effects that we see very commonly with long-term use of proton pump inhibitors and acid blockers. Guess what, guys? Our body knows how to do it really well. We need acid to digest our food. We need it. If we don't have acid, we don't digest our food, we don't pull in our minerals, and we get all of these crazy downstream side effects like kidney failure. These drugs were made to be used very short term, not into perpetuity. 1 in 5 Americans is on these. Spooky. It turns out that there are a lot of really good ways to solve this problem so we don't just have to take a medicine into perpetuity that makes us not absorb our darn foods. Terrifying.